In 1992, Sheriff Thomas Clyde left the Brayfield lockup just before noon, transporting a prisoner across county lines. It was supposed to be a routine drive, 15 miles, 2 turns, 1 bridge. The paperwork was light, just initials on the transfer slip, JK. No priors, no details, no questions. Clyde called in at 11:47 a.m., confirmed pickup, said he was heading toward Havenwood. 10 minutes later, the radio went silent. No static, no break-in signal, just gone. A second unit was sent out by 1 p.m. They searched the road, checked both ends. There was nothing, no wreck, no signs of struggle, just faint tire impressions near the edge of a dry riverbed. The ground looked soft, like something had sunk. But there was no proof and no reason to dig. The prisoner was never logged at Havenwood. The chain of custody report remained unsigned. Thomas Clyde was never seen again. Over the years, the theories came fast. Some believed the prisoner overpowered him. Others said Clyde ran, that he was hiding something. A few thought it was a setup, something darker, something internal, but nothing ever came of it. No body, no badge, just a missing sheriff. And an empty back seat that no one could explain. The case was marked unresolved. The file was boxed and shelved. New sheriffs came. The old road was repaved. Time did what time always does. It buried what didn't have answers. Then, 32 years later, the storms came. Heavy rain, floods that cracked open riverbeds that hadn't breathed in decades. A drone survey team spotted something beneath the silt, a piece of rusted metal just wide enough to reflect. When crews excavated the site, they found the car, Patrol Unit 4-73, nose down in the riverbed, crushed but intact. The driver's side door was sealed shut. The windshield cracked from the inside. The lights were dead, but still there. The cage in the back was bent outward, not from an accident, from pressure, hands, someone trying to get out or in. The back seat was empty, no cuffs, no bones, no trace of a man who had once sat there. But the front told a different story. Dried blood on the dash, fingerprints on the steering wheel, a cracked panel beneath the column, and carved into it a word, Eden, not the prisoner's name, not the sheriff's, not anyone in the system. Just that word, clean, slow, deliberate, and beneath it, a string of numbers, coordinates. The point they marked sat 15 miles deeper into the forest, land that had burned in 1989, never cleared, never mapped, and never meant to be found. The coordinates led them past the edge of any current map into a stretch of forest that hadn't been touched since the fire line swept through in '89. Most of the trees never grew back right. The trunks were thin and blackened, hollow in places, but still standing. Charred stumps lined the ridge like teeth. The air was different here, too still, too quiet. Even the wildlife seemed to avoid it. The search team moved slowly, hiking with handheld scanners and ground-penetrating radar, trying to find any structure that might still exist beneath the surface. At first, they found nothing, just scorched stone and old ash buried under layers of pine and dirt. Then one of the techs noticed a change in the ground. The soil didn't match the surrounding terrain. It was packed differently, leveled, compressed by weight that had once been above it. The team began to dig. Not fast, not with machines, hands and shovels only. Inch by inch, they found concrete, smooth and square. Not a foundation, a hatch. The metal had been sealed shut, but not welded. Whoever closed it meant for it to stay hidden, not gone. The hinges creaked when opened. The first air that escaped smelled stale and sour, not rot, not mold, something else, deeper, colder, like breath that had been held too long. They dropped a camera through the shaft. 15 feet down, it opened into a corridor narrow, dry, lined in cinder block. The walls were marked with soot and what looked like handprints, small, scattered, pressed low against the surface like someone had once crawled through. The team went in slowly, lights low, weapons drawn. The corridor turned once, then opened into a room, square bare, empty except for a single chair bolted to the floor and lines scratched into the wall beside it. Not words, not letters, just hash marks, dozens of them, some deep, some light. One of the officers noticed something carved into the metal base of the chair. The word Eden again, this time followed by 3 initials. JKL. It wasn't clear if it had been written by the same hand, but the pressure in the carving matched. Same groove depth, same slant, same force behind it. Someone had been here. Maybe the prisoner, maybe the sheriff, maybe neither. The floor was dusty, but undisturbed. The dust had settled evenly. No footprints, no drag marks, like no one had walked through in years. Yet something about it felt used. The air didn't move like in an abandoned place. It pressed against skin. Heavy, like it remembered being breathed. Deeper in, they found a second door. Steel, warped but unbroken, pried open just enough to see inside. Beyond it was a second chamber, lower ceilinged and colder. This one had a table, stained, slanted, attached to the wall by rusted brackets, and beneath the table, ropes, not fresh, frayed with time, but the knots were still there, tied tight, too tight for show. This room had been for holding, and something had been held. The back wall was covered in drawings, all in black. Symbols, crosses, concentric circles, figures with no faces. One symbol repeated over and over, a square with one side missing, like a door left open. In the center of the drawings was another word, different handwriting, thinner lines, more rushed. Not Eden this time, but return. The team logged everything, photographed the walls, tagged samples, but the ground itself told more than the air did. Soil samples pulled from the corner showed signs of displacement. Someone had buried something there. They started digging again. 6 inches down, they hit bone. Not full, not a body, just fragments. Human, adult. No match in local records, no dental, just part of a jaw. 3 teeth, and a ring, thick, silver, bent slightly from heat. Engraved inside were the words, County Duty, and the number 473, Clyde's badge ring. The same one he wore every day, the one his wife said he never removed, the one that was never found in the patrol car. It had been here, buried under the room with no light. The press was never notified. The family was told only what they needed to hear. The site was locked down under federal authority pending investigation, but the people who were there, the ones who stood over that hatch and looked down into the dark, knew what it meant. Clyde hadn't run. He hadn't been overpowered. He had been taken somewhere no one was supposed to find, and someone had brought him back just long enough to bury the rest of the story under 12 feet of river silt and 3 decades of silence. The next day they returned to the patrol car, searched it again, every seam, every groove, and found something they had missed. Behind the lining of the trunk, wrapped in an oilcloth, was a notebook. Water, damaged, warped, but still legible. Inside were pages of times and numbers. Road markers, dates. Most didn't make sense. Some were just single letters, SRFA, but in the very back, written in red ink, was a final page. It had no header, just a single line. I took him there, but not for them. He wasn't meant to stay. And nothing else. The notebook was old but careful, every page written with slow, deliberate handwriting, no rambling, no corrections. Most entries were just fragments, times, numbers, initials, some repeated again and again, like someone was trying to remember them or was afraid of forgetting. One symbol showed up on every page, a square with a notch on the lower right corner, the same shape found scratched onto the walls inside the concrete chamber. Some believed it was a location. Others thought it was a door. But the man who wrote it never explained. The pages were signed with initials only. J.K., the same as the prisoner who was never processed. The same man Sheriff Clyde was transporting when he disappeared. No full name had ever been listed in the official report. No fingerprints on file. No mugshot. Just those 2 letters. The team reviewed every old intake form from the Brayfield jail between 1990 and 1992, cross-checking every temporary hold, every mental health referral, every incomplete record. Dozens of files had been damaged in a basement flood 20 years ago. Most were gone. But one incident report remained. A man booked in June 1992 under a temporary psychiatric order. Described as cooperative, quiet, no belongings, no known address, refused to speak, refused to eat, only wrote one thing during his 2-day stay. The word Eden, written 5 times on the back of a food inventory sheet. The name matched, the date matched, the handwriting matched the notebook, and the man's initials were listed as JK. The intake officer had made a note at the bottom of the form. Said the man didn't blink much. Said he stared at the exit door like he was waiting for someone else to come in. The form had never been fully filed. The last page was torn. No official diagnosis. No signature. Just an arrow pointing to a second sheet that was now missing. But someone had made a copy, tucked it into an unrelated case file, found during the audit. And on the back of that copy, barely visible under ink bleed from the other side, was a word, Eden, drawn again, smaller this time. Below it, 7 letters, O-L-I-V-E-R-N. Not a name that showed up in any arrest log. Not a staff member, not a judge, not a known alias. But it was written twice, once in ink, once carved into the margin with something sharp, maybe a pen tip. Someone had wanted it to last. And that changed everything, because the name Oliver N. matched a missing persons report from 1982. A boy, age 13, vanished from a summer camp 2 towns north of Brayfield, left his shoes by the river, never found. The case had gone nowhere. No leads, no body, no suspects. The family moved away. It was never reopened, but now his name had appeared in the handwriting of a man booked 10 years later. A man with no identity, no voice, no trace, who carved Eden into walls and notebooks and left coordinates beneath the dashboard of a buried patrol car. The forensic team ran facial composites based on the old photo of Oliver and compared it to the surviving video footage from the intake camera at Brayfield. The tapes were degraded, black and white, low resolution, but the eyes were the same. The ears, the brow line, even the angle of the jaw. It wasn't proof, not legal proof, but it was enough. If the prisoner Clyde was transporting had once been Oliver N., then something far stranger was unfolding. The man who vanished as a boy had somehow reappeared 10 years later, wordless and alone, only to vanish again with a sheriff who had no reason to disappear. And 32 years later, the car surfaced with no remains, a carved word and a notebook no one should have found. Back at the excavation site, teams pushed deeper into the burn zone, following the same soil type traced on the patrol car's tires. They found another structure. This one collapsed almost entirely. Only part of the entrance remained. A concrete slab sloped into the earth. The door was gone. The frame twisted. But inside the debris they found something buried beneath a layer of soot and melted plastic. An old clipboard, warped and blackened. But the paper inside was preserved just enough. The top sheet listed 5 names, 3 with last names, 2 without. The first name, Oliver N. The second, Cass. Third, Reed. Fourth, Eden. Fifth, silence. It wasn't a roster, There were no dates, no locations, no identifying numbers, but next to each name was a word. Awake, paused, reset, forgotten, and returned. Only one name had returned. Silence. And that word was circled 3 times. The handwriting on the page didn't match the notebook. It was tighter, more rigid, not written in panic, written in structure, like a checklist or a log. This wasn't the work of a prisoner. This was from someone running the place. The remaining pages were too charred to recover, but beneath the clipboard was a child's shoe, half-melted, canvas, small, with a patch on the side shaped like a square with a notch at the bottom. The same symbol again, the same door left open, and in the far corner of the rubble, behind what had once been a shelf, a sealed metal box. It took hours to open it without destroying what was inside, and when they did, they found audio tape, reel to reel, old, marked with faded labels. The reels had names, not file names, spoken names: Eden, Cass, Reed, and one marked only as 473, the unit number of Clyde's patrol car. The audio was sent for restoration. It would take time. Weeks, maybe. But the implication was already clear. Someone had been watching. Someone had been listening. And someone had recorded everything that happened behind the door that no one was supposed to find. The audio tapes arrived at the lab in silence. No one wanted to be the first to hear them. The reels were old, brittle, marked with years and names that meant nothing on their own. Eden, Cass, Reed, 473, and one with no label at all, just a symbol drawn in ink, the square with the broken edge, the open corner that had followed them from concrete walls to buried notebooks to melted shoes. Restoration was slow. The reels had warped from heat and time. The audio was fragile. One technician said the recordings felt alive, like they pulsed beneath the surface, as if the tape itself was waiting to be heard again. The first tape restored was marked Eden. It began with silence, then a click, then a tone, steady, low, mechanical, and then a voice, male, clear, not frightened, speaking in patterns. Each word sounded rehearsed, like reading from a script. Not a story, a ritual. Subject awake, movement restricted, response minimal, word retention, Eden. That was all. Then another click, then silence again. The next file was longer, labeled Reed. This time the voice was different, slower, older, female, maybe, uncertain. It repeated the same words 3 times. He remembers the sky. He remembers the water. He does not remember his name. Then a hum, long, rising in pitch. Then the reel cut out. No screams, no instructions, just fragments, observations, like someone was cataloging behavior. The tape labeled Cass was empty, just static. Then, 15 minutes in, a sudden sound, a breath, one breath, sharp, close to the mic, followed by a single word whispered in near silence. Leave. It wasn't clear who said it. It wasn't clear who they were speaking to. But it wasn't part of a test. It didn't follow the pattern. It sounded like a warning, or maybe a plea. The reel, labeled 4A73, was last. The text waited until the others were logged, then pressed play. What they heard didn't start with sound. It started with shaking, not ambient noise, the tape itself. The reel clicked 3 times like someone had dropped it. Then came the sound of a car door opening. Wind, footsteps, distant birds, then a voice. Not Clyde. Someone else. Male. Mid-30s. Calm. Saying the words. He didn't make it past the first gate. We start again. Then the sound of metal scraping concrete. Then a latch, then dragging, then a different voice, weaker, strained, broken. I told you he wasn't for this. Then silence for almost 10 full minutes. At the end, a final tone played. One long, flat line. Not from the recording, from something inside the room. A system maybe. a signal that the session had ended or that the subject had. Either way, the team shut it off. No one spoke for a long time. Later, they isolated the audio of the car door, matched the ambient sounds to that region, confirmed the sound of a second person being moved, likely from the back seat, and they confirmed the location. Not the buried bunker. Not the hatch. A second site. One not yet uncovered. The sound of water in the background, shallow and fast, matched a creek near an area marked as closed timberland north of the original coordinates. Only accessible by foot. No roads. No surveillance. The name of the place had been scratched off most maps decades ago after the fires destroyed the logging routes. But it had one label left in an old forestry report from 1987. Eden Ridge Substation B. The same Eden written in every corner of the case. The same ridge listed in the notebook found behind the steering column. The same place the sheriff had apparently been taken before his car was driven into the earth. The team moved in fast. The forestry department gave clearance under emergency order. They hiked in under low cloud cover. The trees grew tighter here. Everything felt heavy, like the forest was leaning in. At mile 7, the terrain dipped, and there they found it, a clearing shaped like a square, too clean, too geometric, not natural. At the center, a foundation of stone blocks. No structure, just remains. 4 pillars at each corner, and in the center, a hatch. This one, not metal, wood, blackened, sealed with wax, and on the surface, the same symbol carved again, the open square. They cracked the seal. Beneath the hatch, another shaft. Not deep, maybe 10 feet. Below, the smell of something wrong. Not rot, not mold, just stale, like whatever had lived there didn't breathe. The air hung flat. The floor was soft, lined in old carpet, decayed and damp. The walls were stone. One had collapsed. The others still stood. And in the far wall, words, carved this time not with care, fast, sharp, like someone was out of time. He does not belong to them. Beneath it, more hash marks, more lines. One tally set was different, vertical, not horizontal. 32 marks, 1 for each. Year since Clyde had vanished, and one final word. Silence, not just carved, written in ink, burned into the wall above a metal box, sealed, welded. They removed it carefully, opened it under observation. Inside was fabric, torn, stitched with a sheriff's badge, for a 73. The cloth was soaked with something dark. The patch had been removed and re-sewn, but backward. The name tag was missing, and in its place, a piece of paper, folded, yellowed, typed on an old machine. 7 words. He wore the name, but not the face. No signature, no context, just that. Clyde hadn't just been taken, he had been replaced, or someone had worn the uniform after he disappeared. And whoever left the note wanted that detail to survive. The note changed everything. 7 words typed on a machine that hadn't been used in decades. He wore the name, but not the face. It didn't say who, it didn't say when, but it implied the impossible, that after Clyde disappeared, someone else put on his uniform. Someone else drove his patrol car. Someone else walked out of the forest with his badge stitched to their chest. And for at least a short time, no one noticed. The records from the days following his disappearance were pulled again. Radio logs, incident reports, internal memos. There was a 2-hour gap between the last recorded search and the official missing person entry. 2 hours where no vehicles were seen entering or exiting the county road, but one call came in during that window. A report from a local gas station clerk who said a sheriff's unit had pulled in around 3:15 p.m., bought a bottle of water, didn't speak, and left. The clerk didn't file a formal report, didn't think it mattered, but when shown a photo of Clyde, he hesitated. said the man wore the same uniform, same badge number. Same face, maybe, but the eyes were wrong. Like he hadn't blinked. Like he was learning how to. The statement had been dismissed at the time. Heat stroke, stress, mistaken identity. But now, under new review, it was added to the caseboard. They called it the window. The time between the real Clyde's last transmission and the moment someone else may have stepped into his life. And the more they looked, the more cracks appeared. Clyde's signature on his timesheet that day had been rushed, slightly off center. The angle of the initials tilted upward instead of down. Not definitive, but different. His final mileage log had a number crossed out and rewritten. Again, not proof, but unusual. And the final dispatch note, written in pencil, not ink, with a slight tear at the corner, as if the paper had been handled too hard. Details that didn't register at the time, details that only meant something now. Back at the second site, the team searched deeper. The foundation sat over what used to be a sub-level, maybe a shelter, maybe a containment room. The ground was unstable. Part of the structure had collapsed long ago, but they found a stairwell, narrow, twisted with roots. Halfway down, another door, metal, scorched, sealed from the inside. It took 4 hours to breach it without collapsing the tunnel. Inside, the walls were covered in soot, but also in writing, this time in black paint. Dozens of words, not names, not symbols, rules, written like commandments, repeated, numbered, obey when called, remain still, accept the voice, forget your name, speak only when remembered. Every line carried the same rhythm, like they were meant to be memorized, drilled in. Someone had lived here, or been held here, or taught here. The walls weren't made to keep someone out, they were made to train someone in. In the center of the room, a chair, metal, strapped at the wrists. Restraints rusted but still bolted, facing a blank wall, but behind the wall, a wire, long, frayed, coiled beneath the floor. When they followed it, they found a speaker. Old, no power, but shaped like the ones used in correctional facilities to issue commands. Next to it, a reel deck, empty, but beside it, a tape, unmarked. When played later, the tape held only one thing, a voice, soft, repetitive, whispering the same phrase again and again. You are not the one who came. No emotion, no change in tone. The message looped for 13 minutes before the tape ran out. Beneath the chair, another metal box. This one wasn't sealed. It held photographs, 9 of them, black and white, all of the same man, sheriff's uniform, standing, seated, looking left, looking right. The face was always the same, but the body posture changed. In one, his hands were folded. In another, he stood too straight, unnatural, like a mannequin positioned by someone who didn't understand balance. On the back of each photo, a number, test 1, test 2, test 3, up to test 9. No results listed, just the images, and in test 4, someone had drawn a red X across the face. It wasn't Clyde. Not exactly, the facial structure was off. Close, but wrong. The ears sat lower, the mouth was tighter, the nose bent too sharply at the bridge. It looked like someone trying to become him, not through disguise, through imitation, like a copy too smooth at the edges, like a face that had been taught. The forensic team brought in specialists, facial recognition, behavioral analysts. They confirmed the obvious. All the photos showed the same person. But not Clyde, not the man who vanished. Someone else had been tested to wear the badge. Someone else had been trained to sit in the uniform and look back through the glass. And someone had documented the process. They returned to the first hatch site, hoping for more, and they found it. In the rubble, hidden beneath a metal vent, another strip of film, burned along the edges, curled with age. But when processed, it revealed a sequence of stills, a room, a mirror, a chair, and someone standing behind the glass with a clipboard. Not a uniform, not a doctor, just a figure watching. And in one frame, the person in the chair stared straight ahead, mouth closed, hands tight, eyes wide, and behind them, scrawled on the wall in large, uneven letters, the same word that had followed them from dashboard to notebook to buried chamber: Eden. Only this time, the word was upside down. The upside down word wasn't a mistake, not a careless scrawl or rotated film. The team confirmed the photograph orientation was correct. The room was real. The subject faced forward. The word had been written inverted on the wall behind him. Eden, flipped, mirrored, like it wasn't meant to be read by the person inside the room, but by someone watching from the outside. It wasn't for the subject. It was for the observer. Another layer, another signal, another message tucked behind the design of a place that was never supposed to be found. They began calling it Substation B, unofficially named after the forestry report from the 80s. But it didn't look like a substation, didn't function like one. No power panels, no relay points, no emergency wiring. The structure wasn't about electricity, it was about control, about observation, about repetition. Every room was built to face something, a blank wall, a mirror, a taped voice, a reflection of the person trapped inside. The logs recovered from the foundation slab showed evidence of a burn event in 1993. Same summer, the investigation into Sheriff Clyde quietly closed. The date wasn't a coincidence. Someone had torched the site, not to cover it up, but to seal it, to bury it under enough ash and time that no one would return. But they hadn't destroyed everything. Someone had removed the tapes. Someone had taken the notes. Someone had gone back afterward and laid pieces behind, breadcrumbs, not to expose the system, but to remember it, to test if anyone would notice. Back at the lab, the audio experts ran side-by-side comparisons between the 4A73 tape and the tape found inside Substation B. The voices were not the same, but they followed the same cadence, the same script, each message repeated in identical intervals, same tone, same sentence length, like two actors reading from the same page. And that meant something even worse. It meant there wasn't one site, there wasn't one program, there were multiples. And someone had written the lines for all of them. They called the script the loop short phrases. Easy to remember, easy to repeat, the kind of words that bury themselves under thought. You are not the one who came. He does not belong to them. Forget your name. Obey when called. The tapes were all structured around these same lines. Only one variation appeared, a sentence spoken once on a damaged reel labeled Cass. The door is closing and he is still watching. No context, no name. But the voice was different, more urgent, like it wasn't part of the loop, like it had been recorded live. Maybe someone broke pattern. Maybe someone realized what the loop was doing. Behavioral analysts confirmed the content was consistent with conditioning. The repetition, the mirrored rooms, the timed voices. Someone had been trying to rewrite people, not teach them, not punish them, rewire them, train them to obey without understanding what they had forgotten. And the subject, the person inside the loop, might have been someone like Clyde, or someone made to become him. The uniform, the badge, the stitched name tag found flipped inside the metal box. The note that said he wore the name but not the face. The gas station sighting hours after Clyde disappeared. It was possible that someone had emerged from Substation B dressed like the sheriff, looking like him, driving his patrol car. And maybe that someone had never intended to escape. Maybe they just had one task: return the vehicle, plant the clues, disappear, like the loop wanted to be discovered, but only after the system was already gone. Investigators returned to the riverbed site where the car was recovered. They re-excavated the surrounding area with updated scans. Beneath the layer of hardened clay, 12 feet from the original impact site, they found something else. Metal, not from the car, older, twisted, partially burned, shaped like a chair frame, welded flat to a broken foundation slab, bolted in place at 4 points, and beside it, bone. Not full remains, but enough. A femur, fragments of ribs, a wrist cuff, rusted shut, and a dog tag that didn't belong to any law enforcement registry. The number etched into the metal wasn't a badge number. It was a string of digits that matched one of the entries in the notebook found behind the car's dashboard. One of the repeating codes, S-34871. When cross-checked, the number didn't trace to any public record. No driver's license, no military file, no census entry. But it appeared in 2 other places, carved into the inside of the steering wheel column and etched faintly into the bottom corner of one of the upside-down Eden photographs. Someone had used that number to mark something, or someone. Maybe the subject, maybe the test, maybe the experiment itself. The forensic team tried to reconstruct the event, the placement of the car, the position of the buried frame, the presence of blood in the front but not in the back. They proposed a sequence. Someone drove the vehicle into the riverbed intentionally. The front was staged, the blood applied, the car buried with precision. Someone left the cage door open, smeared the mud by hand, and made it look like a struggle. But no struggle happened there. It had happened earlier. Maybe at the hatch, maybe in the chair. Someone had been placed in a seat and never left. Someone had died there, sealed into a place no one planned to revisit. And that meant Clyde might not have been the first, or the only. Just the one whose car was used to send a message. The last tape in the series, the one with no label, only the open square symbol, was restored late in the process. It didn't contain a voice, not at first, just sound, footsteps, echoing, pacing, then the sound of breathing close, shallow, someone waiting, and at minute 7, the breathing stopped, replaced by a slow knock, not on wood, on metal, 4 knocks, then silence, then a voice, whispering, male, low. If you hear this, you weren't supposed to. The message ended with static. Then another voice, younger, unfamiliar, only one word. Again, as if it had all happened before. They replayed the knock sequence dozens of times, hoping to find a pattern in the rhythm. 4 strikes on metal, no hesitation, no fear in the sound, more like a signal, like someone announcing they had finished something. Or asking for permission to start again. It matched the kind of knock used in older military bunkers to identify clearance for entry. Coded communication. Not random. And that made it worse. Because it suggested whoever was inside that chamber hadn't just been trapped, they had been trained. Conditioned not only to respond to the loop, but to participate in it. To send it forward, the final voice on the tape, the young one who said, again, sounded like it belonged to a teenager. The audio engineers isolated the vocal signature and estimated the age to be somewhere between 15 and 17. Male. Breath steady. Tone calm, like he wasn't reacting to anything, like he was waiting for his turn. The word again was spoken not in fear or confusion, but with the kind of certainty that comes from repetition, like he knew the process, had seen it before, maybe lived through it more than once. They began calling him the Echo, not an official name, just a way to separate him from the subjects listed in the logs: Eden, Cass, Reed, Silence. This one had no name, just a voice, just a single word spoken at the end of a tape meant to be hidden. If he existed, he was still out there, or had once been, not buried, not erased, moving in the quiet edges of a program designed to leave no survivors. They ran the vocal profile through every missing persons case involving teenage boys from 1985 to 1995 within a 300-mile radius. The closest match came from a town called Mesa Grove, 2 hours east of Brayfield. In 1989, a boy named Nolan Hart went missing from a foster care transport. No incident report was filed. No investigation opened. The van was later recovered with no damage, no sign of struggle, and no official explanation. The boy's name never entered national databases, only a handwritten note in a county file listing him as an unreturned dependent. When the team located the original driver, now long retired, he refused to speak at first, then admitted under sworn statement that Nolan had begun repeating things. Lines the driver didn't recognize. Instructions, phrases, not his own words. Said he spoke like he was practicing for someone else. Said Nolan became harder to reach. By the second hour, he wouldn't look out the window, only into the rearview mirror. Wouldn't sleep, wouldn't blink. Just kept whispering something over and over. The driver said he left him at a medical holding station on request. No paperwork, no badge, just a voice on a landline that told him where to go and when to leave. He said he assumed it was authorized, that the call had come from someone inside the system, but no one ever confirmed the station existed. No location matched his description. The county said the number didn't belong to any listed department, and when asked to repeat what Nolan had whispered in the back seat, the driver only said, "He kept asking for the door." That phrase, "asking for the door," came up again days later, scratched into the underside of one of the metal chairs found beneath the burned foundation. It was faint, old, nearly rusted through, but it was there carved carefully, not in panic, written low, where only someone strapped to the seat would have been able to reach. The evidence was building towards something much larger than a missing sheriff. This wasn't about one abduction or one identity. It was about replication, about routines, a loop with parts, a cycle that repeated. They began to piece together a structure. A subject would vanish, often a child, often a teen, sometimes an adult. They would be brought to a place, a substation, a hatch, a chamber, where they would be trained, not punished, trained to forget, to obey, to repeat. Then one of two things would happen. Either they became something else, a role, a copy, a reflection of someone who had disappeared before them, or they failed and were removed, buried, burned, replaced. The programs were not perfect. Some subjects were incomplete. The loop broke, the conditioning fractured. Some escaped, or were left behind when the sites were cleared. But the ones who succeeded, the ones who learned their part, were released into the world, placed where no one would look too closely. People who had already vanished, identities that no longer raised alarms. Like Oliver N., booked as a stranger in Brayfield a decade after his disappearance. Like the person in the photos who wore Clyde's badge, but blinked too slowly. Like the boy in the recording who whispered again, like he had been through the door more than once. It was a system, not a random one, not chaotic, clean, layered, hidden inside the gaps of old departments and disconnected phone lines. They started tracing the symbol, the open square, through old government facility plans, medical institutions, juvenile detention centers, Psychiatric Holdings. It wasn't a logo, but it showed up sometimes in the margins of paperwork, always hand-drawn, never printed, always just faint enough to ignore. And it had a name in one document, a draft memo from 1984 marked internal only. It referred to loop quadrant structures, Eden Protocol. Eden wasn't just a word, it was the name of the system, or at least one part of it. Eden wasn't a place, it was a method. The hatch, the car, the subjects, the voice on the tape. Every piece belonged to something called Protocol Eden, a system meant to test identity against obedience, repetition against memory, silence against survival, and the echo, the boy who asked for the door, had learned how to stay inside long enough to send a message out. The phrase Eden Protocol appeared only once in any official archive. The memo was never published, never circulated beyond the internal routing list, which named 4 recipients. All 4 were later flagged in unrelated investigations and quietly reassigned. 1 retired early. 1 vanished during an audit. 1 was found dead in a hotel parking lot in 1996. Cause of death was listed as natural causes, though the autopsy was never completed. The 4th was never publicly identified, listed only by initials, CRM, no position, no department, just those 3 letters in the upper margin of the memo's routing trail. But what mattered more than the names was the content. The memo was short, clinical, almost detached. It outlined a pilot program designed to measure behavioral collapse in controlled environments. The phrase used was cognitive suspension. The idea was to isolate subjects from personal memory and apply repetitive stimuli until their identity could be modified. The document referred to these sites as loop quadrant structures, Eden units A through D. Each unit was to be constructed in locations that had already experienced some form of public disruption, fires, floods, land disputes, anything that would provide legal and environmental cover for restricted access. Substation B, the burned foundation with the welded box and upside-down word, fit that model exactly. The dry riverbed, where the patrol car had been buried, sat within a floodplain that hadn't been active since 1977. Unit 4. A 7-3 wasn't just the name of Clyde's car. It may have been the designation of the test tied to his disappearance. The deeper they looked, the more the pattern held disappearances that once felt random now aligned with these sites. Teenage boys from the early 80s, low-priority arrests, psychiatric evaluations, juveniles in temporary custody, all lost in transitions, all reappearing either as unidentified subjects or vanishing entirely. It was always between hands, always between systems, just long enough for memory to fray, for names to be replaced with numbers, for roles to be assigned. That was the word the memo used, roles, not identities, not aliases. Roles, like costumes in a play someone else wrote. One person gone, another steps in. Wears the name, follows the loop, keeps the world moving without ever raising alarm. The photo of the Clyde impersonator was re-examined again, not by facial recognition teams, but by posture analysts, people trained to detect imposters through micro movements, blink rates, shoulder alignment, muscle tension. The results were chilling. The man in the photo behaved like someone trained to imitate, not someone who had lived inside the role. His eye contact was off by half a second. His stance leaned 3 degrees too far back. His smile did not reach the muscles near the temples. His uniform was correct. His face believable, but his performance failed just enough to trigger the subconscious sense that something was wrong. Just enough to feel like a mask. And that explained the gas station clerk's reaction. The way he said the eyes were wrong. Like the man was trying to be someone but wasn't sure how. Like he hadn't done it before, or had done it too many times. And that word again. Again. The boy on the tape. The whisper in the dark. The knock. The request. The repetition. Someone wanted to continue the cycle, not escape it. The notebook recovered from behind the patrol car's dash had been overlooked for its simplicity, but now it was examined more closely. The strings of letters, the symbols, the repetition. Every entry followed a schedule. Intervals between lines matched the pacing of the Eden tapes. They weren't journal entries. They were training logs. Someone inside the loop had written them as part of a task. Someone had been documenting how long they could remember the lines before forgetting their own name. Each page degraded. More spelling errors. More lines repeated. More sections crossed out and replaced with words from the loop. One entry read, "I remember my mother," then crossed out. Replaced with, "I remember the water. I remember the sky. I remember silence." Then that, too, was crossed out. Replaced with, "I am the one they gave the badge." Beneath that, the number 4, a 7, 3. It wasn't written like a memory. It was written like instruction. Whoever wrote it had been told who they were supposed to be, not who they were, but who they needed to become. And that meant Clyde's disappearance may not have been the start of the incident. It may have been the endpoint, the success, the moment when the role was filled, the loop completed, and the uniform walked out of the woods. For weeks after that discovery, no new sites were found. No additional structures. No more film. The case began to settle. It looked like the puzzle had stopped growing. Like Eden was a single contained experiment. Buried. Failed. Gone. But then a tip came in. Anonymous. Typed. Mailed in a plain white envelope to the forensic archivist overseeing the case. No return address, no fingerprints, just a short note. "There's one left." And beneath it, coordinates. Not in the same region, not near Brayfield, not near Havenwood, hundreds of miles away. South desert country, flatland, far from the pine ridges and riverbeds where everything had begun. The location was once a military communications outpost, decommissioned in 1979 and used as a training ground for local law enforcement in the late 80s. Shut down after an electrical fire in 1991, sealed and abandoned, exactly the kind of site Eden Protocol would use, not just for access, but for plausible deniability. The memo had said Eden was designed to move, quadrant-based, rotatable, replicable, a structure that didn't rely on one facility, but could be built again and again, each loop independent. Each loop contained. The coordinates pointed to Eden Unit D, the final quadrant, the last piece, the last door, and whatever had been left there, whoever had waited long enough. The entrance to Eden Unit D was almost too clean. No overgrowth, no collapsed roofline, just silence and heat pressing down on cracked concrete slabs surrounded by low desert scrub and distant hills that didn't move. The place had been forgotten, but not erased. It sat tucked behind 2 rusted fences and a line of faded warning signs that flapped quietly in the wind. The doors were welded shut, padlocks fused with rust. But the structure itself had held. The interior was sealed. That was the first clue something important had been left behind. Someone had made sure the elements stayed out. That time slowed down inside. The entry team used slow-cut tools to breach the side panel. Heat spilled from the gap like breath held too long. The air smelled like rubber, dust, and old wires. No rot, no mold, nothing living. Just the trace of insulation, static, and something metallic baked under years of desert sun. The first room was small, square, bare except for a chair and a narrow mirror bolted to the far wall. It wasn't glass. It was polished metal scuffed, scratched in the center. Shaped like a human face had been pressed against it, again And again. The chair was not facing it. The chair was turned away. A choice, maybe, a refusal, or a punishment. Behind the mirror, they found the first camera. Not a recording device, just a lens. No wires, no power, but placed where an observer could sit and watch without being seen. Above the lens, a speaker grill. Old, corroded, but intact. Same model used in the earlier units. Someone had built this room to be watched. Not for punishment, not for containment, but for study. Deeper inside the structure, the pattern repeated. Tight corridors, turns that forced visitors to disorient. Walls that closed in slightly with each step. Another room. This one with a hatch in the center of the floor. Bolted, heavy, circular. They opened it carefully. The shaft below dropped 20 feet. Stone-lined, handholds carved into the sides, no ladder, no rail. At the bottom, a light. Not electric, a reflection bouncing off something glass. A mirror, the third so far, but this one had words carved around its edge, not upside down, not mirrored, upright and centered. They said, observe, replace, reset, begin again. The same loop, the same structure, but more direct, no poetry, no repetition. This one was built as a factory, not a chamber. The map they sketched as they moved through told a clear story. 7 rooms, all shaped alike, all with chairs, all facing either mirrors or blank walls, and in the center of the unit, a square platform with a metal plate embedded into the floor. A seal, labeled D0, not D1, not D7, just 0. The beginning, or the source. And below that, a crawl space, narrow, barely wide enough for a person to slip through. At the end of it, a vault door, heavy, untouched, and welded with a number on its face. Not 473 this time, a new number. 9C21. It wasn't one they had seen before, not in the logs, not in the notebooks. But when they searched the archives again, they found it, buried in a missing file from a 1991 intake report involving a transfer from a juvenile holding facility in New Mexico. The name was partially redacted. The file had been closed due to fire damage, but the code was clear. 9C21, listed under long-form loop candidate. And the file wasn't just about compliance or silence. It included a new word not seen before: integration. The theory, they would later learn, was simple and horrifying. Eden Protocol was never just about removing identity. It was about replacing it, fully, permanently, without detection. Not just imitation, not just obedience. Integration, the total overwrite of a person with someone else's role. And Unit D, this site, was the place where the process was finalized. The vault was forced open under supervision. The air behind it was stale, unmoving, colder than the rest of the facility. Not frozen, just untouched. The room was small, 6 by 6, no windows, one vent, and in the center, a cot. On it, a figure, not a skeleton, not a body decomposed by exposure, but mummified by time and temperature. Clothed preserved, wearing a jumpsuit with no insignia. Just the number 9C21 stitched above the heart. Hands folded, face covered by a cloth. No signs of violence, no restraint. Just a person laid flat in silence, like they had waited too long and fallen still before anyone could return. The team didn't speak for a long time. They took samples, ran scans, preserved everything. The body was eventually identified through hair DNA. It matched a sample from an open missing case. Boy, 16, last seen in 1991. Foster system, no next of kin, same window, same pattern. He had been listed as a transfer, never arrived. Now he had been found. But the report left something out because next to the cot, someone had placed a box. Wood, small, with a mirror inside. Not a glass mirror, just polished steel, etched with a sentence around the rim, the same one carved above the shaft mirror. Observe, replace, reset, begin again. But below it, a second inscription had been scratched in by hand. Clumsy, desperate, uneven. It said, "I failed. He is still watching." No signature, no name. Just that. And behind the mirror, tucked into the back of the box, a final photo. Black and white, low contrast. A child standing in a doorway, face blurred. But behind the child, reflected in the glass, a second figure. Taller, thinner, with no features. Just outline. Like it had been drawn in after the fact, or erased before it could be seen. The photo had no date, but the back had one line written in pencil. Door never closed. The phrase "door never closed" echoed louder than any official report. It wasn't a metaphor. It wasn't symbolic. It meant what it said. Someone had survived the loop. Someone had walked out when they were supposed to stay inside. And worse, someone had stayed behind who was never supposed to watch. The figure in the photo, the second outline in the reflection behind the child, didn't belong to any known subject. It had no face, no identifying mark, just the shape of someone tall, standing still, positioned exactly where the observer would stand behind the mirror. But there was no mirror in the photo, just an open doorway, which meant whoever was watching wasn't behind glass. They were inside the room, and that broke the rule. Eden was built on distance. The loop only worked if the subject never touched the watcher, never saw them, never heard them outside of the recordings. Every sight followed that law. Separation was control. Observation was silence. The presence of someone standing in the same frame as the subject meant something had failed, or something had changed. The box in the vault had included that message for a reason. I failed. He is still watching. It wasn't about an escape. It was about a crack in the loop, a moment when the observer stepped through the door and became real, and someone saw him and couldn't forget. Days after the discovery at Unit D, a woman came forward. She had seen the press leak. Just a photo, not the body, not the vault, just the number, 9C21. She said it belonged to her foster brother, the one who vanished in 1991. The one no one had bothered to search for. She said he used to whisper strange things in his sleep, words he didn't understand, numbers, rules. She thought it was trauma, a game. She never told anyone, but after he disappeared, she started writing them down, and when she saw the photo of the inscription from the mirror, observe, replace, reset, begin again, she pulled out a notebook from a box under her bed. The exact phrase, written over and over, in her brother's handwriting, page after page. She gave the notebook to investigators. Most of it was illegible, scribbles, fragments, loops repeating themselves. But one page stood out. It was dated 2 days before he vanished, written in pencil. A short list, under the heading, "If I Forget." The list had 6 items. Remember the number. Remember the mirror. Remember my sister. Remember the voice wasn't mine. Remember I never blinked before the door. And at the bottom, a note. If they find me and I'm not me, don't let me in. He knew something was coming, or maybe he knew what he had been trained to become, and he feared who would wear his face if he failed. This was the first real break in the system. The first evidence that someone inside the loop had tried to fight back, not through escape, not through violence, but through memory, through writing, through refusing to vanish. And that meant more might have tried. If one had left behind a message, maybe others had too. The team returned to the earlier sites, Hatch A, Substation B, the burn ridge, the car. They looked again. Slower this time, not for records, not for evidence, for personal fragments. And they found them, hidden under floorboards, inside wall panels, etched into the backs of photographs. Small, quiet notes, never addressed to anyone, never signed. Just fragments of thought, moments when the loop had cracked and the person inside it had remembered who they were. One said, "This isn't my name." Another said, "I woke up and the chair was gone." A third said, "They gave me his face, but I kept my voice." They weren't escape plans. They weren't confessions. They were remnants of identity. Small pieces someone tried to protect before they were overwritten, like saving parts of a hard drive before formatting it. The pieces didn't form a full picture. They didn't stop the loop, but they proved one thing. The system wasn't perfect. It didn't always hold. Some minds were too stubborn, some names too loud, some memories refused to be buried, and that led to the second break. A nurse in Havenwood came forward. She had worked at a private psychiatric facility that closed in 1994. She said she remembered a patient who had no name, just a number, 34871, the same number etched inside the patrol car's wheel column, the same one on the dog tag found in the riverbed. She said he never spoke, never made eye contact. But every morning he sat in front of the window and tapped the same rhythm on the glass. 4 knocks. Pause. Then a whisper. Again. Every day. Same rhythm. Same word. When she asked the staff about him, she was told not to engage, not to make eye contact, just deliver meals and leave. She did that for 3 months until he was suddenly gone. No discharge form, no transfer log, just gone. The staff told her he had stabilized, but the room was sealed afterward, not cleaned, not reassigned. Sealed, like whatever he had done, it left something behind. She said she had one thing she kept, a napkin, folded, slipped under her hand during a morning meal drop. She never told anyone. She thought it was nonsense. It said, "Door never closed, face not mine. If he knocks, don't speak." She kept it in a book, forgot about it for decades. And now it matched everything. The same message, the same rhythm, the same voice. Someone was trying to leave instructions from inside a system built to erase them. Someone had endured long enough to remember how it all started and what came through the door after them, and whatever Eden protocol had trained into those subjects. Whatever face, badge, or name they were given, they knew one thing clearly. Something had learned to wear the role better than them, and it was still watching. The most dangerous part of Eden protocol wasn't the loop. It wasn't the hatches or the mirrored rooms or the tapes that whispered obedience through walls no one could see beyond. It was what happened afterward, when the subjects were released, not as themselves, not as victims, but as replacements. Roles with names that weren't theirs, tasks they didn't choose, lives they were taught to wear like a mask, and most of them never broke character. That was the point. The loop wasn't just about erasing a person. It was about building something that could pass undetected. Walk into the world, smile at gas station clerks, wave to neighbors, sign reports, drive patrol cars, blink at the right moments, nod when expected, blend. Most of them did, but not all cracks formed. Some subtle, some loud. Some fractured the loop in ways the designers hadn't predicted. Small acts, private moments, writing on mirrors, numbers left in glove boxes, names etched behind wall panels. And then there were the watchers, the ones who didn't replace, who didn't obey, the ones who stood behind the mirrors and studied. Those were never supposed to be seen, but they were. Too many times. And something about being seen broke the loop. That's what the team began to realize. Eden worked best in silence, in observation without contact. It needed distance. The moment someone looked directly at the person behind the mirror, the moment the subject saw the watcher, everything began to fail. The memory didn't erase, The voice didn't stick. The role didn't hold. And that's why Unit D had been sealed instead of scrubbed. The vault was never meant to be breached. The body left inside wasn't just a failure. It was a warning. The subject had seen the Watcher, and the door hadn't closed in time. When the forensics team examined the room again, they noticed something missed the first time. Faint scoring in the floor beneath the cot. Drag marks, like something had been pulled out or in, but the dust over the area was smooth. No disruption. Which meant the marks were old, possibly from before the unit was sealed. No one knew what had left them. But one thing was clear. Something else had been in the room. Something that didn't belong to the protocol. And it had moved. The team reviewed the photograph again, the one with the child standing in the doorway and the blurred figure in the reflection. They enhanced the image using new software focused on the outline behind the glass. What they found wasn't a person. Not exactly. The limbs were too long, the torso too narrow, the face blank smooth like wax. But most importantly, it had no camera, no clipboard, no badge. Just presence, silent, unmoving. A figure that wasn't supposed to be there but had been reflected anyway. It didn't look like it was observing. It looked like it was waiting. And that changed the question. Eden Protocol had been designed by people, tested on people, built with a purpose: erase, replace, repeat. But what if something else had entered the system? Not a subject, not a designer, not a defector. Something not accounted for, something that learned from the loop, something that didn't need instruction, something that understood how identity was built and how easily it could be taken. The field agents started calling it the blank, not officially, just in their own reports. They didn't know what it was, only that it had been seen in more than one recovered photo, not directly, always in mirrors, always in reflections, never the subject of the shot, always standing behind. In one image, it appeared in the background of a hallway photo inside Substation B. In another, it showed up faintly in the metal paneling behind the chair at the burn site. Always distorted, always watching, never seen directly, and always near the loops that failed. The ones where memory returned, where subjects tried to write, where the door didn't fully seal. The theory was simple and terrifying. Something inside Eden had learned how to stay when everyone else was being reset. Something that didn't forget, didn't blink, didn't need a name. And it waited for the loop to falter, because that's when it moved. Not to hurt, not to speak, just to be seen. And being seen was enough. That's what cracked the mind. That's what turned subjects into fragments. The moment they saw what wasn't supposed to be real, they couldn't return to the loop, couldn't wear the mask, couldn't be replaced. They became noise, static in a system built on control. And Eden couldn't tolerate static, so it buried them, sealed the hatches, burned the sites, drove the patrol car into the riverbed and hoped no one would notice. But someone always did, because memory, even fractured, leaves residue, and those who saw the blank carried pieces of it. With them, words they couldn't explain, images that came back in sleep, voices they couldn't place. Some wrote them down, some whispered them to strangers, some disappeared entirely, but they all shared the same fracture. They all had that one moment, the blink, when they realized the person in the mirror wasn't them, and the person behind the mirror wasn't human. The system had always relied on silence. No bodies, no headlines, no names left behind. Eden didn't erase people with violence. It erased them with absence, quiet, clinical, exact. That was the plan, the design, but it failed. Not all at once, not loudly, in fragments, in traces, in people who were supposed to forget but didn't. in objects that weren't destroyed, in photos that captured more than intended, and in those final messages left by hands that were no longer supposed to be human. The most important cracks didn't come from forensic teams or government archives. They came from the people who lived through it, the ones who slipped past the system, who walked out wearing someone else's name but never quite let go of their own. In the months after Eden Unit D was uncovered, a hotline was quietly established. No public listing, no media release, just a number buried inside the language of an official cold case report, the kind that only someone looking for it would recognize. And people called. Not many, but enough. Some calls were noise confusion, trauma layered with fiction, but others carried a strange consistency. A kind of rhythm only those familiar with Eden would recognize patterns in speech. Words chosen too carefully. Long pauses when asked about identity. One woman said she had been born in a small town that no longer existed. But her records showed she hadn't been born at all. Only that she appeared in 1992. As an adult, with no prior documentation, she said she used to stare at mirrors and wait to see if her face would blink. Another caller was a man who refused to speak until a pattern of knocks was played down the line. 4 taps, then silence, then again, and only then did he whisper, "The voice isn't mine," and then hang up. A third caller never said a word, just tapped on the receiver for exactly 13 minutes. Always the same rhythm. A code someone was supposed to understand. Maybe someone who never made it out. The team began building a map, not of the sites, but of the echoes. The ones who carried pieces of Eden with them. The ones who remembered even when they weren't supposed to. Patterns began to form. Phrases, memories, objects. People who wore uniforms they didn't earn. People who remembered rooms they were never trained to forget. And at the center of it, always, was the same phrase. The door never closed. It showed up in different languages, in different handwriting, carved into the backs of old photographs, scratched onto bed frames, written in the margins of Bibles in halfway houses. Always quiet. Always hidden, like a prayer for the forgotten, a way to pass the memory forward without letting it burn the person holding it. Because holding it too long meant collapse, not just mentally, but physically. The recordings showed that too. One subject, recovered from a temporary site in 1995, had been observed reciting loop phrases in his sleep. But when shown his own handwriting, a note that said, "My name is not his," he began to shake. His pulse dropped. His voice stalled mid-sentence, like his body didn't know how to respond. Like the identity Eden had given him couldn't survive the truth, others reacted differently. Some grew angry, violent. One man broke every mirror in his home after seeing a photo of the Eden symbol. Another walked into a police station and said nothing except, "He wears my face." They weren't trying to expose the system. They didn't have that language. They were trying to survive it. And for some, survival meant warning others, even if they didn't know who. Especially if they didn't know who. Memory had become a kind of resistance, the only weapon left against a protocol that trained people to forget themselves. That's what the notebooks were. That's what the symbols were. Not errors, not anomalies. Messages, left behind like fingerprints. Soft, partial, hidden, but real, and enough. Back at the burn site near Unit B, a second shaft was found. Missed the first time, covered in stone and root, smaller than the main hatch. It led to a narrow room, dark, flooded, long collapsed, but inside, wrapped in plastic and sealed inside a rusted filing drawer, a box of cassettes, not training loops, not conditioning files, recordings, voices, conversations, subjects speaking to each other, whispering names, asking questions. One of them cried, another laughed. One said, "I think I used to draw birds," and another responded, "Don't say that. They'll know." One tape was different. It carried only music, not full songs fragments. The sound of a piano being played by someone trying to remember how. Halting, slow, wrong notes, but not looped, not scripted, real, human. A sound never meant to be heard again, until it was. And beneath the last tape in the drawer, one final slip of paper, barely intact, the ink smeared but still readable. "If I am found and I don't know you, say my name anyway. Something inside me will remember." And that's what Eden could never erase. Not fully, not forever. The people who passed through it had left their names behind. In scratches, in signals, in silence. And now those names were starting to return. The last file in the box wasn't evidence. It wasn't a map or a code or a looped message meant to condition or erase. It was a letter, handwritten, old paper, 2 folds, the edges yellowed, the ink light but steady. It wasn't signed, but it didn't need to be. It was meant for someone who had already been changed. Maybe more than one person. Maybe everyone who had passed through Eden and come out wearing someone else's name. It said, "You will wake up one day and not know what is missing. A face will feel wrong in a mirror. A hand will move like it belongs to someone else. You will say things you don't remember learning. You will forget the sound of your own laugh. The loop will tell you this is normal, that obedience is peace, that memory is infection. But there will be something left behind. It will not be loud. It will not be clear. It will be a hum, a rhythm, a face, a name. It will ask you not to speak, but to notice, not to run, but to resist. And if you can hold it long enough, you will find a way back." The letter was logged, scanned, filed under evidence, but no one could say where it came from. It hadn't been in the original inventory, hadn't been photographed during recovery. It was just there, as if someone had left it behind in the drawer, knowing it would be read when it mattered most. And maybe that was Eden's final failure. It taught its subjects how to obey, how to forget, how to become invisible inside roles someone else wrote. But it also taught them rhythm, taught them silence, taught them to write the same words again and again until muscle memory took over. And that became its undoing. Because when a survivor wanted to leave a message, they knew how. They knew where to hide it, how to shape it, how to wrap it in symbols and numbers and leave it where the next mind, the next watcher, the next fragment might find it. Memory was never gone, only buried, and buried things can be uncovered. The investigation into Eden Protocol would never reach the surface, not officially, not through hearings or televised confession. Too much time had passed. Too many files had burned. Too many names had been sealed and reassigned. But the evidence now lived in quiet places. Locked drawers, back rooms, inside notebooks passed hand to hand. And most importantly, in people. The ones who lived through it. Some of them didn't come back whole. Some didn't come back at all. But a few did. And when they looked at each other across crowded sidewalks or train platforms or quiet waiting rooms, they sometimes paused, not for long, just enough to know the loop hadn't held. And there was one final discovery made months after the sites were sealed, the tapes archived, the photographs boxed. A small-town obituary from 2001. Man found deceased in a field behind his home. Cause listed as exposure. No foul play. Buried with city funds. Unnamed. Unidentified. Just a number. but the number was familiar. It matched a loop designation from the original Eden memo. Subject C02. A person never confirmed as real, now found. And in his coat pocket, a folded piece of paper. Just 4 words. The door never closed. The same phrase. Again, in new handwriting, in a place no one had ever searched, and nearby, carved into a tree with shaking hands. A name, not his, not the name given by the system, a different one. And beneath it, another. As if trying to remember both. As if trying to hold one name long enough to whisper it into the earth so it wouldn't disappear. Eden Protocol wasn't a place. It was a method, a fracture, a repetition. But what survived wasn't the loop. It was the noise that escaped it, the resistance written between the lines, the knock behind the door, the face in the mirror that blinked at the wrong time, the children who never forgot their names, even after someone else wore them, the replacements who left notes for the real ones, the ones who escaped and left the lights on, and the watchers who were watched and changed. They were never supposed to be seen, but they were. And that changed everything. Because once you see the watcher, you can't go back. Not fully, not quietly. You either vanish, or you leave a mark. And Eden, for all its structure and silence, was covered in marks, scratches, stains, codes, signals, names, so many names, carved in panic, written in code, whispered to strangers, pressed into mirrors, left in glove boxes, and each one said the same thing: I was here. I was taken. I remembered. I left something behind, and now someone found it.